It was supposed to be a simple evening. Jenna, a 30-year-old nurse, had just finished her shift at the hospital, the relentless beep of machines still ringing in her ears. She was exhausted but excited. After all, she'd spent the entire day stuck in a world of blood pressure monitors, IV drips, and irritable patients. But tonight was different. Tonight was her first date in ages. She'd met Tom online. The dating profile was generic enough: someone who liked movies, walking their dog, and taking spontaneous trips to the beach. But there was a little mystery to him, which intrigued her. His profile picture? A poorly lit shot of him in a park, but the shadows made his face look a bit off. She didn't question it. At this point, she'd take anything. Her last relationship ended in disaster, so she was eager for a new start. The plan was simple: meet at a cozy cafe downtown, grab a coffee, and see where things went. But when Jenna arrived, Tom was nowhere to be found. She waited for what felt like an eternity, scrolling through her phone, wondering if she was being stood up. That's when she heard it. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Hey, I'm outside. I'll meet you at your car." Jenna frowned, checking her surroundings. No one seemed to be walking toward her. She shrugged. Maybe he was just awkward. Or, a little weird. She gave him the benefit of the doubt and headed toward her car. The air was chilly, and the streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. She reached her car, eyes darting back and forth, half expecting some hidden camera prank. But then, out of nowhere, a figure emerged from the darkness. "Tom?" she called out, her voice cracking slightly. The man who stepped forward was strange. He was wearing a dark trench coat and a pair of oversized glasses, but his face, there was something about it that didn't sit right. His skin was pale, his lips thin and tight, like he hadn't smiled in years. He extended his hand slowly, his fingers long and bony. "You must be Jenna," he said, his voice deep, but oddly soft. She shook his hand, her mind racing. Something was off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. He didn't look like his photos. Those had been, for lack of a better word, filtered. He looked like he'd walked out of a creepy old horror movie. "So you're a nurse, huh?" he asked, breaking the silence as they walked toward the nearby park bench. Jenna nodded, trying to ignore the odd sense of discomfort creeping up her spine. "Yeah, just got off a shift." "You?" Tom chuckled softly. "I'm in the business of saving lives. In my own way." The words felt strange in her ears. They sat down, and Tom started talking about his special skills, a collection of medical oddities, including his ability to tell what people were thinking based on their pulse. He went on to describe how he once diagnosed someone with chronic laziness, based on their unwillingness to move from the couch. Jenna let out a small laugh, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That's when the first twist hit. As Tom continued talking, he began to swear that he'd been to her hospital. He described the layout of the emergency room, how she always drank coffee at the nurse's station at 3 a.m. It was all eerily accurate. Too accurate. She hadn't even told him where she worked. Jenna stiffened. "How do you know all that?" He smiled, but it wasn't comforting. "It's just, I like to keep track of things. People." Before she could respond, something strange happened. The wind picked up, sending a shiver down her spine. She glanced at Tom, only to see his shadow stretching unnaturally long across the park bench. It was as though the shadows were alive, reaching for him like 100 tiny hands. Her heart raced. Was she seeing things? Trying to shake off the unease, Jenna stood up and smiled awkwardly. "Well, I think I should head home. It's getting late." Tom stood with her, his movements slow and deliberate. "Oh, you're not leaving just yet," he said, his tone suddenly much colder. His grip tightened on her wrist, and a shock ran through her body. "You know, I had a lot of plans for tonight." Before she could react, the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble. The streetlights flickered and went out one by one, plunging them into darkness. "Tom?" Jenna's voice wavered. "Just relax. You're going to love the surprise," he said with a grin that sent chills down her spine. Suddenly, a shrill scream cut through the silence. Jenna spun around to see a woman in a hospital gown, her hair matted with something dark and sticky, running toward them. But the woman wasn't moving normally. She was dragging herself across the grass, leaving behind a trail of blood. Tom laughed. "Oh, don't mind her. She's just overreacting." He gestured nonchalantly toward the woman. "She always gets a little worked up about things. She's a patient of mine." Jenna's heart pounded as the woman got closer, but just as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished into thin air, like some kind of optical illusion. Okay, what's going on here?" Jenna demanded. "What do you mean she's a patient of yours?" Tom's face darkened. "You'd be surprised how many people you meet in my line of work. I have a unique approach to medicine." That's when Jenna noticed it. His reflection in the nearby window didn't match his movements. He was standing perfectly still, while the reflection of his face grinned wide, stretching unnaturally as if mocking her. Suddenly, the ground under her feet gave way, and she tumbled down into an underground lair. It looked like a hospital morgue, only it was twisted in ways that no sane person could imagine. The walls were lined with old operating tables and dusty equipment, and a long row of bodies lay covered on steel slabs. But none of them looked dead, just asleep. Tom followed her down, his voice almost a whisper. "Welcome to my office." Before Jenna could react, a loud, jarring laugh echoed through the room, making her blood run cold. The lights flickered back on, revealing a creature, a half-human, half-ghost figure that glided across the floor like it was hovering. It grinned maniacally at Jenna, its eyes glowing a sickly green. "Surprise!" Tom said. "You're the next patient." Just as the creature lunged at her, Jenna pushed a heavy surgical tool onto the floor, the sudden clang breaking the creature's focus. She took the chance to run, but as she sprinted toward the exit, she realized the walls had started to close in. The air grew thick with a damp, rotting stench, and Jenna's heart pounded as she forced herself forward. And then, the lights flickered once more, revealing Tom standing in front of the exit. "But I thought you liked surprises?" he asked with a sinister grin. She froze, her pulse racing, the door just inches away. That's when a loud bang echoed from behind her. Something had exploded, sending debris flying into the air. She didn't stop running. With one final push, Jenna slammed the door open and stumbled into the daylight. And yet, something was wrong. The cafe wasn't where it had been. Her car had vanished. She turned around, only to find that the entire street had become a hospital, the same one she worked at, but distorted and twisted. The nurses and doctors walked around like shadows, their faces pale, eyes lifeless. Jenna blinked. Was she still in the real world? Or had she fallen into some nightmare she could never escape? "See you soon," a voice whispered in her ear. Jenna whipped around. Tom was still there, standing at the edge of the street, watching her with those piercing eyes. She was no longer sure if he was just a man or something much, much worse. And the worst part? She didn't know if she was awake.